the things that strikes me, and one of the challenges that I have, not just in my organisation, but in many others that we work with, is digital literacy, understanding digital and data to the point where they recognise the question that they're asking, to your point. And without that level of basic understanding of digital data and how it all weaves together, then it's just give me information because that's the silver bullet that's going to solve my problems.
All right, so first question, guys, right? People, our people, staff, customers, and the product service quality, whether you're delivering a service or a product. Those are the three pillars that we always talk about in business, right? You've got to have good people, treat your people well. You've got to focus on your customers, and what you're delivering has got to be good quality, right? But data, those are the three core pillars that's been talked about for eons. But data seems to be becoming an important fourth pillar. Does it deserve to be that important fourth pillar? Yeah, or is it a blip? Ian, I'm going to get you to start with a business perspective on this, right? Justify why all those boards you talk to, why they should be taking it as seriously as those other three.
Okay, so my first thought to that question is yes and no is the answer. So a bit of a consultant answer there. I'll do some slides later with that on a 2x2 matrix.
It'll cost you 10 grand.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus a partner will come and let's do the upsell. So the reason why I say yes and no is clearly those three pillars are at the heart of a business. To me, data underpins all three. So you can't function unless you know your customers, know your product, and know your people. Sounds obvious, but I don't think companies have a good handle on that. So clearly then data becomes a means to that better understanding. I think it's almost as simple as that. To me, though, things are broken, systems, processes, communication. So I do think data, that's where it can come into play and really help build up that richer picture of those three areas. So hence, yes and no, whether you see it as a separate thing or an underpinning thing, fundamentally the business does need to get a much better handle on its data. Most clients I work for as well do get that point. So there's a good foundation to build from.
Okay, that's great. Jess, he's got to be wrong, right? I mean, data's just some boring numbers, right? And we just do it as technologists, right? And the business don't really need to understand it and have it as a core pillar, do they?
So I think we do deserve a bit of recognition, and it does deserve to be because data people, they've kept us locked up in real small dark rooms for so long, and we've been treated as the awkward sort of black sheep of the family. It's like, who are those weird guys over there? They're the data people. Don't feed them. But seriously, I think people are realising now that actually data underpins everything, and it doesn't matter whether it's business, whatever, it's all driven by it, and people are beginning to realise that, and they're also seeing that where you're getting success, it's being driven very much by data, whether it's data science, whether it's just cheap, easy stuff in SQL. People are beginning to realise that now, so yes, I think it does.
Brilliant. Okay, so it definitely deserves to be up there with a pillar, but we're coming out of the dark ages and being recognised, right? We like that. That was the subject of one of our previous panels, technology being recognised at a more serious business level. Sam, tell us about data in your company. Why does it deserve to be that pillar? Why is it important to you?
Well, I probably shouldn't say it given my colleagues are over there, but maybe data doesn't need to be a pillar on its own unless we can couple it with some intelligence. Okay. And if I think about healthcare, it's about outcomes. And if I can't get the best outcome for a patient, so not just a customer, the data becomes pointless. So I have to use it in a way that gets a better outcome for an individual. So if I can do that and that brings a business benefit, then great. But if I can't, then it can't be data for the sake of data. So it does deserve to be there as long as it can drive value, drive an outcome, and ultimately for us, make someone less ill.
Okay, great. So Joe, your job is all about data and data science this and data science that. Given what Sam just said, are you a solution looking for a problem?
Oh, that's cruel. Well, actually, I think what Sam said was spot on, because it is all about outcomes. But if you have data in a dark room not being fed, then they can't drive outcomes and they can't be a part of those solutions and feeding directly into the product. Whereas if it is a pillar, if it is a focus, whether it needs to be a kind of a foundation or another pillar, they can feed into what data needs to be collected, what experiments need to be run, and what outcomes need to be driven, and that adds value, I think.
Excellent. Shock horror, the business needs to communicate to technology, and technology needs to deliver value based on that data. I like it.
That's first time.
Right. We'll put that on your... Yeah, great. Okay. So, James, NHS. I mean, recently data's become quite important to the NHS, right? Tell us about how you're using data to up there with one of the key pillars in the NHS. Or not.
Why do I feel I'm going to get a kicking on this subject?
No, go for it. They're nice people. They're all right.
So let's keep in mind, I don't represent the NHS at a national level for data. I'm not in charge of wait times, GP blockages.
This sounds like a pre-prepared sort of...
or any of that. But I tell you what, you get Sam and I behind a bottle of beer or a glass of wine, and we'll talk to you about it all day long. Data's important. I think one of the challenges that we have is being able to fight with the likes of a lot of people that are in this room and work in the vicinity of this area for the intelligent people to actually do something with it. We know we've got information. It's so fragmented and so broken up. We don't quite know how to utilise it properly. We're so far behind in terms of investment in infrastructure just to be able to hold it, to harness it, let alone having the brains to then do something intelligent with it. It's in such small pockets that people spend ages building political careers on what they're going to do with that data instead of thinking, as was said previously, about those that are at the end of that data that need us to drive the insights so that we can improve outcomes for them. But they would rather focus on trying to win a few points in another election. That's a challenge I have.
I'm sure that sounds like quite a challenge and a politically charged arena that you operate in. Well done for navigating it.
May I do a build on
Yeah,
that?
sure, go for it.
So I think it's a really interesting point here. And I think one of the reasons why we have this situation where there's a lot of data not being harnessed, I think the business actually fails to ask clear questions of itself and its teams, essentially. So for those who put their hands up to being more business, have you actually given clear direction to your data teams as to what you need the answers for? What do you need to answer for them? I think that's where there's a lot of problems. People have their own agendas. Everyone wants their own bit service. But strategically, has the organisation asked the right questions that need data to help solve that problem? That's what I think is a real missing piece at the moment.
So let's build on that, Ian, right? I think you're spot on. And as a CTO, my byword is like, so what do you want to do with it? That's kind of how that comes across all the time. But how do you answer that question? Because I'm not convinced. I think there's a lot of what you're saying. Data, right? So I'm not convinced people are able to answer that question. And yet part of our job is to help them answer that question. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we do that? You do this day in, day out, Joe, right? You talk to people and you explain how data works, right? We're bearing in mind there might be some Zigo people in the room, right? So go steady. But, how do you deal with that, like when people turn up and say, I want all the data?
That's a good question, because I come from, my background has been, I want all the data because eventually maybe it will be valuable. But now, linking that all the way back through from like where we're collecting it and why we're collecting it, all the way back through to the people who are making the models and doing that backroom data stuff. That's what brings the difference. That conversation, it's the same thing that I mentioned a minute ago.
Sure.
Really.
Okay. Yeah, go for it, James.
Sorry. One of the things that strikes me, and one of the challenges that I have, not just in my organisation, but in many others that we work with, is digital literacy, understanding digital and data to the point where they recognise the question that they're asking, to your point. And without that level of basic understanding of digital data and how it all weaves together, then it's just give me information because that's the silver bullet that's going to solve my problems. But I think the challenge is far more fundamental, especially with people who have been in the NHS for 30, 40 odd years, and they're a clinician by background, or they're an anaesthetist or a gynecologist, and now they're on an executive board, and they've got data somewhere within their subset of activities. one of the challenges we have is to drive the digital literacy so they understand the questions that they're trying to ask. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I think it's key, and I think you were touching on that as well, Joe. There's some education in there, right? And I think there's some patience in there as well. But I think the education should go backwards into technology as well, right? We need to, we're turning up and saying, here's the data. It's in a huge data lake. You can do whatever you like with it, right? And I don't think that helps all the time, right? In my organisation, we're trying to have the conversation one step at a time, right? So we don't necessarily have a completely mapped out data strategy or even completely mapped out data model, but people have challenges on a daily basis and they want to know something. So we're trying to take a more of a I'll get a moan at this phrase, but we're trying to take a more of an MVP approach, right? One report at a time, or one access piece of data at a time, and seeing where we build. And I think, to your point, that's sort of like, I want all the data. So actually there's a technology challenge, which is, well, just find some way of getting all the data in one place and make sure you're capturing it all, by the way, right? And then we'll work it out as we go. Go on, Sam, what's your response to that?
Well, look, I think data's never going to be perfect. The quality of it will never be perfect. We live in an imperfect world. And I guess we need to have data people, scientists, analysts, who are used to the uncertainty, who can deal with it, who can weigh it up and provide an intelligent response, which is, here you go, here's some data, here's my sort of confidence in it, but what is it you want to do with it? And also teach people to have that business view. So not only are they great analysts and scientists and statisticians, but they actually understand the business needs, so they can weigh it up and give a view that might be quite different. And I might not ask the right question, but they might know, actually, what are you trying to get to? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And they might help me get the right data rather than it being one way.
Cool, okay. What do you think about that, Jess?
Yeah, and I think it's quite a few of the problems I've seen with data over the years is that it's been a top-down driven thing where the people who look after the data, they go, there's your data.
Yeah.
And they give it to people how they think they want it. And that drives and has driven so many problems. Whereas it really needs to be a bottom-up driven approach where people say what they do want, not this is what you've got, because then it's never the data you want and it never represents what you want. But to do that, you have to really build the team all the way out, because they may be speaking to developers at the highest end, and having a product owner speaking to a developer, you may as well have an alien speaking to me. Right. It's not going to work. So you need to have people like analysts who are in there as well, who understand the data, and they can speak developer to your developers, sure, but they can also speak product owner. So they can speak a more simple language to them, and that can help translate the needs then. And we're building that out more now, and we find we get a far higher hit rate. It was always like, this data's not quite what we wanted. Well, yeah, but you've got it now. Right. Can't you make do? Whereas if you've got analysts, product owners can speak to the analysts, this is kind of what I want. And the analysts know the data so well, they know whether it's there, they can just build a different model, or they've got to go to the developer, and then they can actually communicate to the developer what they want. So it's about building out that chain who can all speak to each other. So end to end, actually, you get what you want.
I think that's intelligent. As I was listening to you, I was just like, okay, so we need some people who understand what they're talking about to bridge the gap between people who don't, right? And then the people who do. That sounds like technology for the last 50 years, right? It's just, to your point, data's just suddenly seems to have become more and more important. So we've got to do the same that we did for all of those other things that everybody didn't understand for this. I didn't hear a convincing, yes, it's the fourth pillar in that conversation, right? I heard it's important. I maybe heard people oversell it a little bit, panacea for all ills, but I heard it's valuable. I heard we want all of the data. I heard the business should justify what they're asking for.